Welcome to Small Arm Solutions. Today we're doing part 3 of our Feeding the Black Rifle series. And I have a lot of people that I would love to thank to who've helped make this happen. They've sent me magazines that I was looking for to make this as complete as I possibly can. So we're going to jump right into it. Unfortunately, we didn't get to do as much firing as I would have liked to due to the ammunition shortage. However, several of these I do have extensive experience with from the beginning, going back for quite some time, so I'll be able to weigh in on that. One of the first things I want to show you is a magazine that we have for sale. This is a promotional Mission First Tactical magazine with our logo on it. These were sent to me just by mistake, actually. They may just show me that thanks for helping us out reviewing our products, and they put my logo on there. Well, I have never seen my logo look this nice on any piece of equipment. They did an absolute beautiful job, so I talked to them about see if they would make these for us to sell. So if you are interested in these are $25. We have to pre-order them to determine how many of them will be needed. But please email Heather if you're interested at hbartacci@smallarmsolutions.com. The first one we're going to take a look at is one that I'm sure there's several of you out there who will disagree with me. My experience is unwavering with the poor quality that I've seen with the Beta C mags. But we have the Beta C mag here, which is a 100-round dual drum magazine. Now, this retails for just around $300, and they are extremely expensive and, quite frankly, extremely unreliable. I had initially, I would say going back at least 10 years ago, I was writing an article for Small Arms Review. It was a two-part series on Feeding the Black Rifle, and I had gotten one of these for review, and didn't work. I sent it back in for a second one, came back, didn't work. They sent it back for the third time, didn't work. I was never really able to get a full 100 rounds through this drum magazine. Now, that's not my only experience. I was doing some consulting work for LWRCI, 2006, something along those lines. They had just finished up their individual carbine, and I was working on them with their 6.8 SPC rifle. And I went in there, I was taking a look at their individual carbine, and they had said that we had tested the Beta C drums in there, but we could not get them to work. We had to make modifications to them so we'll be able to get them to work in our guns for testing. And I guess when they returned the magazines to Beta C, they were really upset that they made it, they had modified them, but they had to. There was the only way that they would get them to work. Now, these have been used in the Colt LMGs. I saw when I was at Colt. Again, I never used them because of the bad results. They had intermittent results with them working. I would say that if you're looking for a high-capacity magazine, this probably would not be the way to go for as far as reliability, especially for what you're paying. These have to be taken apart. They have to be cleaned. I think you're far better off going with something like a D60 Magpul. Even though it's 60 rounds instead of 100, it's reliable. It's going to work 100% of the time, and you're not going to have to worry about it. It also is very loud when you try walking with this inserted on a weapon also. So this is really not something that I would say for real world use. And again, I'm sure there's plenty of guys out there who do work for them. Great for you. I'm glad you've had experience. I've had a lot of different ones of these to try and get to work, and I just never had the luck. The next one we're looking at, we talked about in our previous videos. It was the Schmeiser put out by American Tactical, and that was this particular one right here. Now, my initial testing with these showed that they worked great in most guns. The only problem that we ever had was the way the bolt will lock open the last shot. In fact, it happened with the LMG because you had a tab on here instead of it being part of the follower. To lock open the bolt catch, there's a sliding lever here, and that did prevent some of the reliability of bolt locking open after the last shot. We had no issues with the reliability and functioning whatsoever. Well, this year they came out with a Gen 2 magazine. As you can see, we have an orange follower, and they have corrected the issue with the lock open issue. They have now made the bolt catch part of the follower like it should have been to begin with. And this magazine I've tested and has worked perfect. Now, there's another one. This is not a Gen 3, but it's just an updated Gen 2, and this was just released a few weeks ago. And this has a window where you're able to see the rounds that are inside of the magazine. which is certainly a great enhancement even over this one. So you have the enhanced follower, and now you have the window on here as well. Now, just as a heads up, I'm also testing one of these that is designed now for the AK-47. It's a 60-round coffin magazine for the AK-47 made by Schmeisser for ATI. I've only got a couple of magazines through it just due to the lack of ammunition, but you're going to be seeing a video coming up in the very near future that's going to talk about the reliability of the new 7.62 by 39 magazine. The next magazine, we're going really back into the 80s. This was manufactured by a company that back in those days was quite popular called Ramline. It was a very cheap, very unstable, very finicky, and very unreliable magazine. This particular magazine was meant for 3 different rifles: AR-15 M16, it had the cutout for the AR-18, AR-180, and also it had the cutouts for the Mini 14. So it was designed for 3 different magazines. Now we're going back into the early days of polymer magazines where they did not hold up very well. The polymers were not anywhere near what they are today. This was a very early version of it, and they were cheap, and they perform cheap. This is not really a magazine that I would recommend for anything other than range use, if you still see them around. I mean, these haven't been available in a long time. There's going to be a video that's going to be coming up in the future. It's going to be on the history of the polymer magazines, where we're going to go over the very early polymer magazines to where we are today, and you can really see how far we've come to the point where people wouldn't even look at polymer magazines, to the point now where the best magazine in the world, in my opinion, probably is the Magpul P-Mag, which is a polymer magazine. And they really had to work their way up on that. They had to go from a reputation of garbage like this to becoming what they are today. But the Ramline magazine, although it was for 3 different rifles, it's not something that I would recommend for any serious work or any reliability. I think these probably at the most have collector's value because of their being old and original. The next magazine we have here is manufactured in Israel, the Orlight magazine. Now, the Orlight magazine is also one of the early magazines, but this was also military grade. If you go back in the earlier video we did here, we talked about the Thermold. Thermold was also a Canadian magazine that was used by Damaco. And again, it was not a magazine that did very well. The later versions did decently. They did get some military use out of them. Now, the Orlight magazines were manufactured in Israel. They were used by the IDF. Again, they were not stellar in their quality. However, they were good range magazines. And if you have a good one, they could be decent as duty magazines as well. However, by today's standards, this is very much obsolete. The P-Mags, the Lancer magazines have these blown away for as far as durability and reliability. You can very much squeeze these. These were not, again, a very durable material. They would also be known for splitting on seams. But they were very inexpensive. They did work, and they certainly were much better than the Ramlines, and probably the Thermold at the time too. I would definitely say that the magazine I have here is probably better than the early Thermolds that I have as well. Now we're going to start getting into the GI magazines. Now, the GI magazines, I do have examples here, thanks to you guys, for most of the ones that were made. I'm sure there's probably ones in here that are missing. However, these are the manufacturers that I am most aware of. And we're going to start off with the 20-round magazines. Now, 20-round magazines in the early days in the Vietnam War, as many of you know, were a steel magazine. They were the waffle pattern magazine. They were gotten rid of very quickly because of durability and reliability issues, and they went to the aluminum magazines. Now, the Colt magazines are mostly made by OK Industries, but the most common magazines that were used were OK Industries, Universal Industries, and Parsons. Now, the original magazines had aluminum followers. Universal magazines were... as far as quality was concerned, this is going to apply to all the GI magazines. Do the GI magazines work? Yes, all of these work. Now, some of you would say, hey, well, no, Sanchez is garbage. Parsons is, Cooper's garbage. I've had problems with those. You need to put this into perspective. When these magazines were manufactured new, they were made to the GI prints, and yes, they worked. By the time most of these got out into the commercial market, gun shows and so forth, God knows what happened to them. These magazines were never designed to be used over and over and over and over again. And God knows they come from training areas, or they were used over and over again. They were worn out, they were bent, they were damaged. So when you look at these magazines, pretty much other than Sanchez did have some issues for as far as the military production was concerned, with the way that they had done their their spot welding. They were missing one spot weld on each end, and there were legitimate problems with those. But the rest of these magazines were all manufactured as per GI specs. They all did work at times when they were brand new. The problems didn't really come up until civilians started getting a hold of them, and they were garbage because they were bent, and God knows how long they've been used, how the springs were weak and whatnot. So you need to keep that in mind when you're talking about the GI magazines. Now, many of these manufacturers were sold to a new manufacturer, The dies went from one manufacturer to another, so they were all the original dies. Not much had changed really other than the followers. The followers we discuss in Fiend Black Rifle, I think it's the first one. We go over the black followers, the green followers, tan to blue. And of course, we have with the Magpul right now, the enhanced followers. And there's even some other ones that were done by Nice Armament. So the followers had changed, but the overall magazines really have not. So during the 70s and 80s is when you saw most of the Universal Industry magazines. Most of these, the dry film lubricant finish was gone. You would notice on the front of them, you would have a emblem, UI. You also see the UI on the Cooper magazines as well, because what happened often would you'd have one company who's manufacturing the bodies, or manufacturing them for a second or third source party, and they just put their own base plate on them. And you'll see that a lot with the GI 3-round magazines. You'll see 33710 on there, which is the OK Industries cage code. And they made them for all kinds of manufacturers with OEM plates on them, but they were manufactured by all OK Industries. And they had a very poor dry film lubricant finish that was put on it, and you can see these are basically silver, where most of that finish has come right off. But these worked very, very well. Now, while we're talking about the 20-round magazines, I want to talk about something else. People used to always say that during the Vietnam War, they had to put 18 rounds in here because the springs would wear out. That is not what happened, although that was what was commonly thought. These magazines were designed to hold 20 rounds, and they worked perfect with 20 rounds. The reality is because of the way they were stiff and the way the round sat, once you had 20 rounds in it and you tried inserting on a closed bolt, you may have to have a lot more effort to snap it into position. So you would remove one round, so say 19 rounds, and that would make it easier, just like it is with the 3-round magazines. Well, we only put 28 rounds in a 3-round magazine. Well, why do you do that? You do that very simply because if you want to put the magazine in a rifle with a closed bolt, there's a lot of stress on there. It would make it much easier to place that magazine into the magazine well on a closed bolt by a reduction of one round. The springs do not wear out. What causes the spring to wear out is the spring going up and down. It's not being in the loaded position or the unloaded position. It's going up and down. So you could basically store a magazine as long as the magazine held up. You could store it indefinitely, with it in the loaded position with the magazine being full. You wouldn't have an issue. It's only when the magazine is used. So there's a lot of mechanical fallacies that are out there. There's a lot of perceptions of things too. Then when you actually go at it from an engineering standpoint and say, no, that's not true. That's not why that happened. That's not how that happened. There's a lot of perceptions with the GIs that you had to do that because you didn't want your magazine to wear out. But that was not the case. Now, the 20-round magazines also for disassembly were different than the 30-round magazines. You actually had a retainer plate in here. You'd push downward on the retainer plate with the tip of a round, and you would push the retainer plate down, and you would slide the back off, where the 3-round magazines, you just pried up at one end, and there was tabs that were located in the bottom of the floor plate that you would slide over. This was not meant to be done very often because these little retainer clips or retainers tabs on here would break off easy. I have had that when I was younger and didn't really realize what the design intent of these magazines were. I had broken off a couple of these tabs because I was taking them apart and cleaning them all the time. That's not what they're designed for. So I would not recommend you taking these things apart unless you absolutely have to because you got sand or something in them. Other than that, I would leave them alone. So now we're going to get into the 30-round magazines. Some of the earliest ones were Adventureline and Parsons. Both manufactured to the same quality. Both have, as you see, the black followers. Adventureline, they also made 20 rounds. In Parsons, I have seen some 20-rounders on occasion, very, very rare. But most of these things, once they came to the 30-round magazines, is when the real mass production began of magazines. And there were second, third, fourth, fifth sources of them being made. These were very common to be seen at gun shows when I was a kid. But the Adventureline, I was always quite fond of. The 3-round magazines were redesigned for as far as the way the tabs were on the back. Instead of having the tabs separate, you had it was connected from the back to the front, so it was more durable. If you were dropped them on the back here, you had more support here, so they wouldn't deform when they were dropped as much as the 20-round magazines would. The black followers in the early days worked perfect with the 5.56 M193 ball ammunition. The green follower did not come into really until the M16A2 program because of the difference in the shape of the projectile, and that would enhance it for as far as feeding was concerned. But the black followers worked just fine back in those days. But you will find the Adventure Line and the Parsons still to this day in gun shows. The military bases will still have a lot of these old things hanging around. You would think that they would do a lot more purging than they really do, but you can still find these things. These things generally work fine in training brigades and things like that, but you would certainly hope that magazines from the 1970s and 80s would be purged out by now, but you never know what you're going to see. The next ones you see are Center Industries. Now, Center's industry goes way back, right to it, again, from the black follower to the modern-day tan followers. Now, the tan follower magazines, as we discussed earlier on, I had found a problem with those when I worked at Colt. I was notified by a friend of mine at Fort Drum. They were getting ready to deploy, and they had just gotten cases of these in, and they were having failures to feed with the M4s and the M16A4s. And he had contacted me at Colt and see if I knew anything about it, and I had gotten these in to test, and we found out that there were design problems with these. But Center has been there for many, many, many years. They have been excellent quality magazines. The problem that was pretty much with the Tan Follower magazine was not necessarily due to Center's problems. It was the design of them. I know at Colt, while I was there up until 2010, even though these were being issued to troops, Colt was still not providing these with the rifles to the government. They were still providing the ones with the green followers, and Colt would never have regardless of what the military said, they would not provide a magazine or any kind of a part that they had not qualified and tested to make sure that it wouldn't damage the integrity of the rifle. And I do know that it was quite some time after I was no longer at Colt before they started providing the magazines with the tan followers, but it was always a problem. But Center Industries has always been a very good quality magazine. We're going to go over this in a few minutes, but the 6P199 is their cage code. All the magazines pretty much, probably from, I'd say the 80s, late 80s forward, you would find cage codes on the magazine well body, so they were identified as to who the manufacturer was. But we're going to be going over a list of different cage codes, so you guys will know who they are and how to recognize them. The next magazine we have is Sanchez Industries. Now, I've seen these with both black and green followers. These were ones there was problems with. In fact, when you take a look at the front and you compare the two, you'll see how there was an issue with the way they were doing the spot welding. Now, the spot welding, as you can see here, you'll see there was additional ones that were placed on here. That was because of the initial problems that came out. They didn't have enough, so they ended up doubling these to try to get the magazines to meet specifications so they could deliver them. These were a problem, and there was only, if I believe, 1 or 2 shipments of these that were ever made to the U.S. government because they were a real problem. So Sanchez, if there's anyone that you want to keep away from, this is it. And this was for the reason that it was with the welding issues, and they had a very short service with the U.S. military. Cooper was another earlier manufacturer. Now, I don't believe I ever saw these with anything other than the black followers, but these were early. They had several millions that were in a contract. Again, it was a GI magazine. There wasn't any real major issues with it. They worked. Again, they work until they're worn out, and it's time to dispose of them. So Cooper, you can see them out there. Now, all these magazines you could basically take and you could get rid of the followers and you can replace them with the Magpul followers, and you can turn these into excellent magazines again, the anti-tilt followers. So all these can be rebuilt. Using the magazine bodies, you can replace both the spring as well as the followers. LaBelle was another magazine that we have that was both black and green followers. LaBelle magazines also were very good. LaBelle was eventually sold. They came out of, I believe, Oconomowoc, Wisconsin. They are now D&H Tactical. So the same company, LaBelle, is now D&H Tactical. And again, they don't do a lot with the U.S. government, but they do a lot with foreign governments. They do a lot with commercial markets, and they're quite good aluminum magazine. The next one we want to talk about is OK Industries, and those are always noticed by, you'll see 33710 cage code on there. This is the longest serving U.S. government 3-round magazine in our inventory. They actually worked with Colt and the government to develop the 30-round magazine, and they have been Colt's primary supplier since the inception of the rifle, and definitely since the inception of 30-round magazines. There was a time when all these other magazines you see came out, especially during Gulf War I, well, I think it was also in Gulf War II, was sort of a similar issue, that these were the only magazines that were shippable because of reliability issues in the sand. There was a time where OK Industries was the only one the U.S. government was accepting. Now, OK Industries has base plates. You will see Colt, you will see LMT, you will see numerous manufacturers who use OK Industry magazines. But again, you always will see 33710 on the left side of the magazine, regardless of what it says on the bottom. You're looking for that cage code, and that will tell you that it's OK Industries. They've made everything. They've made black. They've made green. They've made tan. They've made new enhanced magazines, the new EPMs, enhanced performance magazines. They have made everything, and they've always been the top quality. So anybody who's looking for an aluminum magazine, if you have a choice, the best aluminum magazine, in my opinion, on the industry will be manufactured by OK Industries. Next, we have Brownells. Many of you may not know that Brownells had a $2.6 million magazine contract for the U.S. government with tan followers. Most people don't really realize that Brownells does a lot more than just sell to gunsmiths and parts. They also are a government contractor. Excellent magazines. They have their own magazines they manufacture for the commercial market. Excellent magazines that have been available. You'll see, just Brownell's name on those. They don't really have a cage code that you'll see on there, but they do have a military cage code, which we're going to go over in a minute. But Brownell's magazines, if you see them in tan, they're probably where the U.S. government contract. Again, $2.6 million. I'm sure some of those have gotten out into the civilian market. But there's no question that Brownells makes excellent magazines. The next magazines we'll talk about is the Defense Solutions Group. Now, I have not particularly seen these in service yet. However, I've been given to understand that these have been bought by the U.S. government. It's not something that I have seen, so I got them anyways. They are typical GI magazines. Nothing really noteworthy about them. One of these has a green follower, and one of them has a Magpul enhanced follower, and that's the way these were bought. So, again, I have not necessarily seen these as being used by anybody in the U.S. government, but that does not mean that they haven't. And these are pretty much the main ones that have been used by the U.S. government. But again, there may be other ones that I haven't seen. I don't know everything. These are the ones that I've come across in my years with the weapons platform. Now, I want to go over cage codes, how you identify these magazines. And there's something else that's relatively interesting too, is when you see how the manufacturers have gone and they've evolved, and they've one's bought one out and something else has come up. So cage codes, you're going to see a list coming up here. You can follow me down this list. The first one is OK Industries, and that's cage code 33710. Cooper Industries, cage code 03089. Center Industries Corporation, 6P199. LaBelle, 90435. Magpul, 1LX50. Brownells, 12238. C Products Defense, 6M9 and 8. D&H Tactical has two, Q4T4 and 04T04. Defense Solutions Group, 1L0J5, and H&K has two as well, 3HN74 and F8463. When you look at the manufacturers of the magazines, you will see where one company had sold to another, so we're going to go over that. We're going to look at Adventure Line Manufacturing. That was sold to Parsons Precision Products, and then that was sold to Center Industries, which is what it is today. And LaBelle went to D&H Tactical. And you will see that the other manufacturers, you had one manufacturer of those, they did their run, and then that was it. There was no further evolution in their magazines. But there was three of those manufacturers that went from one to another. So the next one I want to talk about, this is, we've already talked about the high-capacity torque bags, the ones that utilize the spring in the front as well as a magazine follower spring, which helps keep the nose of the bullet up so you don't have any kind of failures to feed. This is the new 40-round magazine. Obviously, it's much more practical than their 50, which is much longer, which doesn't really work very well for prone, but it works very well as a standard magazine because it doesn't really stick out that much more than a 30. But we definitely put several rounds through the torque mags, and I've had very, very good luck with them. At some point, I'd love to have the opportunity to test some M855A1 in these if I can ever get my hands on any in testing quantities to see how this works for as far as the feeding of those. But the whole point of having the Enhanced Performance magazine was to make it so that round presented itself up higher so the tip of the bullet wouldn't hit the barrel extension or the front of the upper receiver, around where the barrel extension is, damaging the receiver. The next magazine we have is the Syntec magazine. Not a magazine that I would recommend by a long shot. These here is a very, very poor polymer magazine. When I was testing these magazines, we loaded them and they were dropped, and the rounds would pop right out because there was not enough engagement for as far as the feed lips were onto the cartridge. Not a magazine that I would recommend. It's a much cheaper and much thinner polymer than most that's out there, and just not overall a very good magazine. The next two we're going to talk about are some of the Brownell's retro magazines. Brownell's has done an absolute incredible job bringing some of these things back, these retro things that people like me who love the history of the M16 just really, really get off on. The first one we have here is their steel waffle pattern magazine. Now, this was brought back for their model 601, BRN 601, early version. They manufactured first as just the bodies that were made by Nodak Spud, and now they had them is full of magazines. The one that I keep in my BRN 601 is this with an aluminum follower. This has the polymer follower because I have a few of these. This is an excellent magazine for nostalgia. For as far as reliability is concerned, I really haven't shot that much out of it. I've used them a few times in my BRN 601. Didn't have any problems with them, but it's just not one that I used on a regular basis. Those of you who are doing retro rifles for the, especially the 601 type, these are absolutely a must. The next one is when they did their BRN Proto, they developed the 25 round magazine. Now, the 25 round magazine does not work very well, and it has nothing to do with what Brownell's did. It had to do with the way the cartridge stack was. The rounds would stack. You did have a very, very slight taper. 20 rounds did very, very well, but once you got above 20, you were having problems with the failures to feed coming out of the magazine because the noses were stuck down. So this is not what I would recommend to you as a go-to magazine or a defensive magazine. For you guys who are doing nostalgia or doing any kind of the prototype guns, this is an excellent magazine to give that. This looks pretty good in your BRN 180 also, having the 25 round magazine. But these were developed really, really early, prior to Colt getting the design for the M16 AR-15. But this is another really, really cool magazine put out by Brownell's. Lastly, we have a Korean SHK magazine. Now, these are only like $7. However, they are worth every penny. When you get the feel of the Korean magazine, it has that feel of the HK High Reliability magazine, and very, very, very well made. And for that price, now I've used these quite a bit. I have a few of these that I've shot quite a bit. Never had a single issue with them. These are literally ones you can bang on. They're very, 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 very high quality, and I certainly would have no problem recommending these for any use whatsoever. They haven't really seen too much use military or law enforcement that I'm aware of. However, I definitely have to say these have that same feel, sort of like the Elander magazines and the HK High Reliability, just this real heavy-duty steel construction. Well, I hope you guys have enjoyed this 3-part series on feeding the Black Rifle. Now, I'm sure I don't have every magazine that's ever been produced, but I think we got a good number of them covered. I've had an extensive experience with several of them. Some of them not so much as others. Other ones, just because I've seen enough of them, you can tell a lot by the quality of them, by types of materials that they use, and what you want to use. But you can see very clearly that if you want real-world magazines, that there's a handful that you know for sure you're always going to be able to go on. So what are my favorites? Well, my go-to magazine has and always will be the Magpul P-Mag. That's my number one. My number two will be the Lancer. It'll be the L5. And then outside of that, for aluminum magazines, OK Industries is always my go-to magazines. HK High Reliability magazines, along with the Elanders, are excellent if you want the heavyweight steel magazines. The ones you stay away from are a lot of these really cheap polymer ones that you do have problems. These older ones, the Oralites, the Ram lines, the ones that, really early on. Same thing with the thermals. The newer thermals aren't as bad as the original ones, but they're still not what I would say is a defensive magazine. I'm very picky when it comes to real world gear versus testing gear. Now, I have a box, which is, yay big, where when I test guns, that I have many different examples of everything that you've seen in these 3 videos. They'll be in there, so they go through through the Gallet testing rifles for magazine compatibility. And for the most part, a lot of these magazines work fine under range conditions. If I find a magazine that doesn't work properly, I get rid of it, and I won't recommend it. But there's a lot of magazines out there that they're not great, they're not bad, but they work. The Hero magazines is another one that I like quite a bit. The earlier versions of Mission First Tactical, the early Mission First Tactical, I wouldn't go anywhere near, but the generations 2 and 3 are excellent. They corrected all the issues with the type of polymer they were using in their design, and they're excellent magazines now. So I do hope you all enjoyed this video. If you do, please click like, please subscribe, and even better share it, and please consider becoming part of our Patreon family. We are a viewer-funded channel. Thank you.